Hello, I'm Bakhtiar Sonova and you're watching A News Now. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Donald Trump introduces additional tariffs on 8 European countries over Greenland. European Union and Mercosur sign trade deal after 25 years of negotiations. And NASA begins final preparations for its next crewed moon mission. European leaders have rebuked a move by U.S. President Donald Trump to impose tariffs on 8 European countries until a deal is reached on Greenland. This comes as Trump argues the Danish island is vital for U.S. security.
8 European countries will face new tariffs on goods from the United States unless Denmark accepts a deal over Greenland. The threat comes from U.S. President Donald Trump, who has long argued that acquiring the Arctic island is vital to U.S. national security. In a social media post on Saturday, Trump said a 10% levy would take effect on the 1st of February, with a further 15% added on the 1st of June. The U.S. president said the affected countries, including Denmark, France, Germany and Britain, would face the tariffs until a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. The threat has drawn swift rebukes from Nordic capitals and major European leaders and has fueled calls for a coordinated EU-level response. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen said he was surprised by the tariff threat and noted that Denmark was in close contact with the European Commission. In a joint statement, EU President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa warned that tariffs linked to Greenland would undermine transatlantic ties and risk a dangerous downward spiral. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said it was completely wrong to impose tariffs on allies for pursuing collective security within NATO, adding that Britain would raise the issue directly with the US administration. French President Emmanuel Macron described the threat as unacceptable, saying on his X account that Europeans would respond in a united and coordinated manner if the measures were confirmed. Cyprus, which currently holds the EU's rotating presidency, has called an emergency meeting for Sunday, with ambassadors from the bloc's 27 member states set to convene to coordinate next steps. The episode has also reignited debate over whether the EU should activate stronger defensive trade tools, including the bloc's so-called bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument, further complicating EU-US trade politics in the European Parliament.
The European Union and the countries of the South American trade bloc Mercosur have signed a free trade agreement on Saturday, despite strong opposition from European farmers. Farmers across Europe have been protesting the deal for more than a year, and the latest decision has sparked fresh clashes in several countries.
The EU and Mercosur have signed a deal that paves the way for the European Union's largest ever trade agreement at a time of mounting tariff threats. Leaders sealed the agreement in Paraguay's capital, Asunción, ending more than 25 years of difficult negotiations. The deal aims to cut tariffs and boost trade between the two regions. It is seen as a major geopolitical win for the EU at a time of rising American tariffs and increasing Chinese exports. The ceremony was attended by the presidents of Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, as well as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was represented by his foreign minister.
We are creating the largest free trade zone in the world. We are creating a market of 700 million people, and a GDP of almost 20% of the global GDP is being traded here. This is phenomenal. And this agreement sends a very strong message to the world. It reflects a clear and deliberate choice. We choose fair trade over tariffs. We choose a productive long-term partnership over isolation, and above all, we intend to deliver real and tangible benefits to our people and our businesses.
The deal is expected to boost European exports of cars, wine and cheese, while allowing more South American beef, poultry, sugar, rice, honey and soybeans into Europe. It is due to come into force by the end of 2026. However, the agreement has angered European farmers who fear cheaper imports produced under lower standards and using pesticides banned in the EU. Protests have seen tractors block streets in cities including Paris, Brussels and Warsaw. The deal still needs to be ratified, with a heated debate expected in the European Parliament. Powerful protectionist groups on both sides, especially European farmers, could still delay or block its implementation.
At least one person has been killed and 3 others injured after a Russian drone struck a residential area in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv overnight. Officials said the attack damaged homes and critical infrastructure, with emergency services extinguishing fires that broke out at the affected sites. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, has frequently come under fire since the war with Russia began in February 2022. Ukraine says senior officials are heading to Washington for key talks with the United States as Kyiv seeks progress on security guarantees amid renewed Russian threats and a worsening energy crisis.
Ukraine says senior officials are traveling to the United States for talks on security guarantees and a post-war recovery framework. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv is seeking clarity on next steps and Russia's response to US-backed diplomatic efforts.
We hope that there will be more clarity regarding the documents that we have already prepared with the American side, as well as Russia's response to all the diplomatic work that has taken place and is still ongoing.
Zelensky says Ukraine has completed its part of the work, with a possible signing expected in Davos if the documents are approved.
If everything is finalized, if there is acceptance from the American side, because from our side, in principle, I believe that we are finished, and then it will be possible to sign during Davos.
He also warned that Ukraine faces growing security risks, as intelligence points to new large-scale Russian attacks, while air defense supplies remain insufficient. At the same time, Ukraine is facing its most severe energy crisis since the start of the war, following repeated Russian strikes and extreme winter conditions. Electricity remains limited, with supplies prioritized for essential services.
There was no such difficult situation in Kyiv since the beginning of the war. The last attack was very significant and painful for our city because half of the houses, high-rise buildings in our city, which is about 6,000, were disconnected from the heat supply when it is -20 outside at night. At the moment, there are about 100 buildings without heating. That is, almost all 6,000 buildings have heating now.
Ukraine has declared an energy emergency. Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal says all power plants in the country have been damaged by Russian strikes. He says Russia carried out 612 targeted attacks on Ukraine's energy grid in 2025, knocking out thousands of megawatts of capacity.
The annual World Economic Forum opens in Davos next week as world leaders gather to discuss key political and economic challenges. Organizers say the event will feature the largest ever U.S. delegation led by President Donald Trump.
Business and political leaders will gather in Davos next week for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting as the global rules-based economic order faces growing pressure. The 56th edition of the forum, running from January 19th to 23rd, is being held under the theme A Spirit of Dialogue. Forum leaders say dialogue is essential at a time of rising geopolitical tensions and economic uncertainty. US President Donald Trump is expected to attend, leading the largest American delegation in Davos history. It will include senior cabinet members, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and a bipartisan group from Congress. World Economic Forum President Borge Brende said dialogue is not a luxury but a necessity, though critics argue the forum risks losing relevance as major powers pursue national interests. More than 3,000 delegates from over 130 countries are expected, including 64 heads of state and government, with key discussions focusing on global trade, geopolitics, and artificial intelligence. Organisers say the meeting aims to help leaders find common ground and shape cooperation for the future.
The world is entering a new phase of risk where global cooperation is fading and competition between major powers is reshaping politics, economies and technology. From trade wars and AI threats to social unrest, the World Economic Forum warns that the choices made now will define global stability for the next decade.
The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2026 warns that uncertainty now defines the global outlook. Drawing on views from more than 1,300 experts, the report shows growing concern across geopolitical, economic and technological risks. Half of respondents expect the next 2 years to be turbulent or stormy. That number rises to 57% over the next decade. Only 1% foresee a calm global future. Geo-economic confrontation is seen as the most immediate threat in 2026. Trade conflicts, protectionism and economic pressure between major powers are increasing instability and raising the risk of wider conflict. State-based armed conflict ranks close behind. The report highlights a retreat from multilateralism. Trust between nations is weakening as governments turn inward. Global cooperation is giving way to competition in an increasingly fragmented world. Economic risks are intensifying. Experts warn of rising chances of economic downturns, inflation, and asset bubbles. High debt and fragile markets could trigger renewed global volatility with serious social consequences. Technology risks are rising fast. Misinformation and cyber insecurity remain major concerns. The long-term risks of artificial intelligence are climbing sharply and could reshape jobs, societies, and global security. Social pressures are growing. Inequality remains the most interconnected global risk. Political polarization and distrust in institutions are deepening, threatening social stability. While environmental risks are losing urgency in the short term, they remain the most severe long-term threats. Extreme weather and climate change still dominate the 10-year outlook. Looking ahead, nearly 70% of experts expect a multipolar, fragmented global order driven by rivalry rather than cooperation. The report concludes that while risks are rising, the future remains open, and global choices made today will shape what comes next.
NASA begins final preparations for its next crewed moon mission. On Saturday, the agency rolled its giant Space Launch System rocket to the launch pad in Florida. The 322-foot-tall rocket moved slowly from the Vehicle Assembly Building to Kennedy Space Center's Pad 39B. The mission, called Artemis II, will carry 4 astronauts, 3 from the United States and 1 from Canada. They are set to fly around the moon and return to Earth on a 10-day journey. Launch is planned for early February, pending a key countdown rehearsal. Artemis II follows NASA's successful uncrewed moon flight in 2022.
To witness this historic moment.
Now we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is set to raise the issue of the return of Syrian nationals during talks with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara in Berlin next Tuesday. A government spokesperson said Germany is seeking to deepen relations and make a fresh start with Syria's new leadership. Officials say several key issues will be discussed, including the voluntary return of Syrians to their home country.
We're here today to work with you.
The human rights group Activist News Agency said on Saturday that the death toll from widespread anti-government protests in Iran has risen to more than 3,300. The figure follows 3 weeks of protests with more than 4,000 cases still under review. Demonstrations erupted across Iran in late December last year over economic challenges and have also led to the arrest of more than 20,000 people, according to reports. Kazakhstan is adjusting its oil export routes amid ongoing disruptions to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The changes follow a series of attacks and potential restrictions that have raised concerns over supply security and budgetary risks. Our correspondent reports.
Kazakhstan is redirecting its oil exports amid ongoing restrictions on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, the key route that carries up to 80% of the country's crude exports. In late December, around 300,000 tons of oil were redirected via alternative routes through the Castrans-Oil system. Supplies were sent to Germany, China, along the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan corridor, and through the Russian ports of Novorossiysk and Ust-Luga. Kazakhstan's national oil company says these measures will continue into January 2026 as long as restrictions remain in place. At the same time, Kazakhstan is increasing deliveries to Europe. In 2025, exports to Germany reached 2.1 million tons, while with the volumes expected to rise to 2.5 million tons next year. Oil shipments to China remain stable, totaling 1.1 million tons last year. Tensions escalated after an attack on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium on November 29th last year. Kazakhstan's foreign ministry described the incident as an act of aggression and lodged an official protest. In mid-December, the energy minister confirmed the losses of 480,000 tons, but said the annual production and export targets would still be met. In January this year, the situation worsened. Drones targeted two tankers preparing to load Kazakh oil, causing damage while the vessels were awaiting loading. And according to experts, continued attacks along this route could lead to significant financial losses for the state budget. They argue that the current situation calls not for temporary measures or emergency fixes, but for a systematic long-term diversification strategy. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Media accreditation has opened for the 13th World Urban Forum, the United Nations' largest global conference on sustainable urbanization. According to WF13 Azerbaijan Operations Company, all media representatives wishing to attend the event, to be held in Baku on May 17 to 22, 2026. Accreditation is available exclusively through UN Habitat's official registration platform. Journalists attending the forum will have access to high-level discussions, press briefings and dedicated media facilities throughout the 6-day event. While Russia continues its full-scale war in Ukraine, a major sanctions evasion network is helping it acquire critical Western technology. An exclusive A-News investigative documentary, Shadow Trade, reveals how Armenia has become a central hub in the scheme.
Despite sweeping Western sanctions, Russia's military machine continues to receive a flood of vital foreign components. Exclusive A-News investigation reveals a key route through Armenia. Data shows Armenian exports to Russia exploded from $880 million before the war to nearly $3 billion now. The spike is in specific critical categories: phones, computers, machinery and microchips, exactly what Russia needs for its weapons.
A lot of countries cannot export directly to Russia because of sanctions. So imagine the trucks that have a lot of electronics, a lot of phones come to Armenia. Some trucks from Russia, some trucks from other countries. And the goods from other countries on the spot are hauled from one truck to the other on the spot. And those go to Russia. And the paperwork is such that those products were produced in Armenia. But this is the case. So this is in fact re-exports. So the paperwork says that those products were produced in Armenia, so to circumvent the sanctions.
Experts say Armenia's small economy could never absorb or produce such a volume, confirming it's a transit point.
Seeing that kind of data, seeing that evolution of demand in those countries, that evolution of their trade with the European Union, we can say for sure that not the story about the development of their economies and their industries, that's the story about the re-export of goods via their territories to the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian forensic teams dismantle Russian missiles and drones daily, finding them full of these Western microchips. They confirm the components are essential for Russia's attacks.
So in general, we have identified about 600 components, different components in different types of weapons. I'm sure that if these chips will not provide it to Russia, they will not be able to use missiles and the drones.
In return, Armenia receives billions in sanctioned Russian gold.
According to the Armenian Customs Service, the country sharply increased its gold imports in 2023, and in the first half of 2024, it reached $4.4 billion, about 66 tons. And there are companies which are backed by Armenian oligarchs and politicians who are part of this entire scheme, which also raises legitimate questions whether the Armenian government is aware or somehow protects this entire business.
To move this volume, investigators track the operation to Yerevan's Zvartnots airport, where cargo traffic doubled. The gold is then re-exported to markets like the UAE, creating a secret financial channel for Moscow. While Armenia's Prime Minister speaks of European aspirations, the investigation finds the country deeply enmeshed in Russia's sanction-busting network, a network with deadly consequences on the Ukrainian front.
You're up to date with World News for Hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News for more.